Marc, thanks so much. Great to see you again. I know you were down here in Tampa last week. We had a chance to meet face to face, so I want to thank you again for joining us today.
No, absolutely happy to. Wish I was down there again. The weather's much nicer.
It certainly is. It's this is the time of the year when it gets gorgeous and it's not super hot. So, Marc, let me ask you your thoughts about what you saw here on day two with Marie Yovanovitch, the former ambassador, testifying in front of this House Select Committee on Intelligence.
Well, we're through 2 days of these hearings, and I'm still waiting for the first person to actually have witnessed something. We've had now 2 days of hearings with people who've never talked to the president, weren't on the president's phone calls, had no knowledge of what was going on, but only could testify about the rumor, gossip, innuendo, what other people told them or what they heard from other people. And we actually haven't had a first witness that was actually on the call. We've all seen the call, and so this is really just a poll-tested now shift show that we've got going on for day two.
Yeah, well, interesting there. I wanted to ask you specific questions about what we heard here today, and let's start out with the president's tweet. The president this morning, attacking former Ambassador Yovanovitch, saying that that she was unsuccessful everywhere she went, talking about her time in Somalia and then how things went when she went to the Ukraine. It seems as though, in fact, we know Representative Swalwell, who sits on the committee there, said that that could be added as an article of impeachment against Donald Trump were they to be drawn up for obstruction of justice or witness tampering. Your reaction to that?
Well, Representative Swalwell is beclowning himself again. Let's not forget that they have spent most of the day correctly celebrating this ambassador for serving in some of the most difficult countries and places in the world where she and her embassy have come under fire, and they think that a tweet is going to intimidate her. I think not. And as the White House has said, the president was expressing his opinion. He has a right to do that. But what we're getting at ultimately here is something that the ambassador admitted time and time again, is that every president of the United States has a right to name and recall ambassadors at their discretion. The president exercised his.
That's a great point, and she certainly admitted the same thing, Marc. But I do want to ask you, it does seem odd, the timing and the circumstances under which she was recalled. And I want to go back to the transcript of the phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky, where President Trump mentions what he called the woman, Yovanovitch, saying that the former ambassador was bad news and the people she was dealing with in the Ukraine were bad news. Talked about this prosecutor who was a very good prosecutor. We know now that prosecutor was disgraced, was corrupt, that the do not prosecute list that he accused Yovanovitch of circulating was false, and that was a lie. So what was the president talking about?
Well, I think the president wanted to make sure that he had an ambassador in the Ukraine that was seeking out the interests of the United States as defined by the commander-in-chief and the president of the United States. We know for a fact that Ukraine has been the most corrupt country, named by many people, in the world, and is among the top most corrupt countries in the world on every single front. We had a new administration with President Zelensky, as the president was rightfully calling out, that ran on a platform of getting rid of that corruption. And so if there was any kind of doubt from President Zelensky whether the ambassador had a good relationship with him, the president wanted to make sure that we had a clean slate, we had a good place to go, and a person that he trusted that was going to enact the U.S. policy as he defined it. As she also admitted, the President Trump's foreign policy as it related to Ukraine was much stronger than President Obama's. We were giving them the lethal aid that they needed to be able to defend themselves against Russia, but we also needed to make sure that they were doing the steps they promised to do to seek out and end corruption.
But I think that's where the confusion comes from. She was in support of those moves. She was in support of Zelensky. She was fighting corruption. That's part of the reason why these two corrupt former prosecutors didn't like her, and why these two gentlemen who've now been indicted, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, were also trying to feed Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney, bad information about the ambassador. So I just... It's the timing is a little bit surprising here, and what the president was talking about ended up being false, and that's where I think people are curious.
Well, and ultimately, what we have to remember, it's the president's decision. He has the right to make that decision. He made the decision. He thought it was time to recall her and have a new ambassador in place. But none of these things rise to any kind of a level of impeachment. Every president has the ability, and it is unquestioned ability, to replace and move ambassadors as they deem appropriate. And when it came to the actual impeachment inquiry, once again, there was no crime that was even discussed today that Ambassador Yovanovitch would have had any kind of information on. They've not proven anything. And as we saw this morning in a bombshell that was buried in the middle of a Washington Post story, the Democrats are now actually poll testing what crimes that they think they should charge the president with. They're basing this on politics and polling and not actually on fact.
Representative Krishnamurthy, towards the end there of those proceedings, laid out a timeline, the first explanation that we had really heard from the members on the committee of why he thinks Yovanovitch was recalled, saying that she was recalled. About a month and a half later, Bill Taylor is named the new ambassador to the Ukraine, leaving just the amount of time in the middle where this irregular or back channel of foreign policy to the Ukraine could take place, with Ambassador Sondland, Ambassador Volker, and Secretary Perry, being referred to as the three amigos. Your thoughts on his assertion that the president purposefully recalled her so that he could get investigations launched into his political rival, former Vice President Joe Biden?
Well, that's just nothing more than speculation, because as we know, the investigations haven't started. We also know that the aid was released. And, you know, it's amazing how the Democrats just keep moving the goalposts on this time and time again. Every time one of their narratives falls short, whether it's collusion, whether it's obstruction, whether quid pro quo, now they've tested, and apparently the polls like the word bribery, so that's what they're going to go with today. And yet they still cannot prove any of these facts, and yet they're marching our country off the cliff into an impeachment because they just don't like the president and disagree with his style.
Marc Lotter of President Trump's 2020 re-election campaign. Really appreciate your time, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always good to be with you.
Thanks so much, Mark. We'll talk to you again sometime soon.